Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Are you confident it's going to be Boris Johnson?
Well, you can never be certain of anything in politics, but I think it's very likely Boris will win, yes.
The Tory party has a working majority of 2. There's a by-election in 2 weeks' time, which is expected to be won by the Liberal Democrats, which will further shrink that working majority. So does a new leader therefore not need to build a consensus? And is Boris Johnson going to be able to do that when he's basically sent out a message saying, if you don't support no deal Brexit, you can't serve in my cabinet?
Well, on the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, I think it is going to be close, but I would say to people who live there, vote for the Conservative candidate to deliver a government that can get Brexit
sorry, it's not a I don't want you to campaign now for that, but the point is you've got a wafer-thin majority. Is Boris Johnson going to be a leader, if he wins, who can build consensus?
Yes, I think he can. He's already been meeting one-to-one in the last 2 or 3 days with some of the existing cabinet ministers who have expressed some concerns, people like David Gauke, Rory Stewart and Philip Hammond. So I think by doing that, before he's even been elected, he's demonstrating a willingness to listen and a desire to forge consensus. As you've said, with essentially no majority or virtually no majority, we do need to stick together to get this done, because I fear that the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the SNP will kind of play games with the Brexit issue as they've been doing over the last year or so, rather than trying to constructively deliver the decision the British people took.
Just on what is happening within your own party and attempts to build consensus, you mentioned that Boris Johnson met Rory Stewart to ask if he'd be willing to serve in his cabinet. This is what Rory Stewart said afterwards. I wasn't quite sure he remembered who I was. I said I was the one in the leadership race who was not in favour of a no-deal Brexit. He seemed disappointed and surprised by this.
Well, I wasn't in that meeting, so I wasn't a fly in the wall, so I can't kind of comment on what was said. But what I do know is that Boris would like to leave the European Union with a deal which protects trade in both directions. But we should acknowledge that if it's not possible to reach a sensible agreement with the European Union, which sadly so far has not been possible, then the only alternative is to either leave with no deal or have another referendum. And given we've had one referendum already, I don't see the purpose in having another. So it sort of logically follows that if you want to respect the referendum result and you can't reach a sensible deal, the only alternative is to leave with no deal. But I imagine what will happen over the next 3 months between now and the 31st of October is, firstly, we will enormously step up preparations for that no-deal exit, including discussing with the European Union how it would work in practice, while at the same time trying to secure improvements to the existing deal such that it has a good chance of passing Parliament.
That's a lot to pack into 3 months, which hasn't been done in 3 years. And obviously, we hear the optimism that it can be done. Brexit on October the 31st, do or die, says Boris Johnson, while saying at the same time there's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of us leaving with no deal. It cannot be both of those, can it?
Well, I think you've got to prepare for both eventualities. I would hope that when he goes and talks to the European Union, the European Commission, and explains what changes are needed to make the withdrawal agreement work for us, I hope they respond constructively and positively, because what we're asking for is completely reasonable. But we have to just prepare for the fact and be ready for the fact that if they aren't going to make some reasonable, sensible changes, then we have to be prepared for that no-deal exit. So I think simultaneously pursuing both of those paths and seeing which one we end up having to take is a sensible thing to do, because, as you say, time is very short. There isn't time to do it sequentially, one after the other. We've got to basically do both together, prepare for no deal and try and strike a sensible deal at the same time. There's no time to do one and then the other.
How does he guarantee to deliver leaving on the 31st of October, potentially with no deal, when there is no parliamentary majority for that? There are already cabinet members. We had yesterday Sir Alan Duncan resigning from the government. Others are lining up to do so and indicating, including the Chancellor Philip Hammond, and indicating that they would be prepared potentially to vote against the government in order to block a no-deal Brexit. It can't be guaranteed, can it?
Well, we should bear in mind that an exit with or without a deal on the 31st of October is baked into primary legislation. We've triggered Article 50, we've passed the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. It is in primary legislation that we will leave, and the only way you can undo that is with another piece of primary legislation. So it's not entirely clear to me that it's especially straightforward for Parliament to prevent a no-deal exit in any case. But I think what I would say to people like Philip and others that you just mentioned is that, we had a referendum over 3 years ago, or 3 years and a month ago. The British public took a decision to leave. It wasn't leave brackets if we can do a good deal, or leave brackets if it looks like it'll be okay. It was just, we'll leave full stop. And we should respect that. Now, we've spent 3 years trying to get a deal. We're going to spend probably another 3 months trying to improve on that such that Parliament will accept it. But if after 3 years and 4 months of trying to get a deal that is sensible and that Parliament will pass, it doesn't prove possible to do that, there is no alternative but to leave.
We're running out of time. We want to speak to our 10 Tory party activists who've been able to vote in this contest. I want to ask you about the kippers thing. Boris Johnson saying EU red tape has forced extra costs on kipper producers. It turned out not to be true at all. It's actually down to the UK's Food Standards Agency. Does it worry you that potentially our new Prime Minister got something like that so wrong at this time?
Well, look, I'm not familiar with the, if I'm honest, I'm not familiar with the details of kipper regulation.
Well, but neither was he, but he's potentially going to be our next Prime Minister, and he was saying it's one of the reasons that we should be leaving.
Look, Croydon South, which I represent, is not big in the kipper industry, so I'm not familiar with it. I think the more general point is that clearly if we're outside the European Union, there are European Union regulations affecting a whole range of different areas which we won't necessarily be bound by unless we choose to be, and that will enable us to create a more competitive environment for British business if it turns out that's what we'd like to do. It may be, of course, we choose to accept some regulations in exchange for having lower trade barriers, but that will be a sovereign choice that the United Kingdom makes at its discretion rather than being forced on us as it is currently as members of the European Union. That, I think, is the general point, and he's absolutely right to make it.
And just very quickly, because we're about to speak to 10 members of the wider Conservative Party who've all voted in this contest. 2 of them are under 18 because under the Tory party rules they can vote in this contest. So they've had a say on who's going to be the next Prime Minister. Already there have been questions around the democracy of this, with the new Prime Minister being voted by such a small constituency. What's your view of the fact that also there are people who've got to vote who couldn't have voted if it were a general election? Well,
this is obviously a party election. It's, the Conservative Party, like any political party, is an organisation that is different to a public election. Look, I think it's great that our membership numbers are going up. They were reported a year or two ago as being 120,000. I think I saw a figure recently saying they're now up by 50% to 180,000, while of course Labour membership, while higher, is declining. So I think this is a very healthy exercise. 180,000 people participating in choosing our Prime Minister. It wasn't long ago when the Prime Minister of either party was chosen behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room. I'm delighted that it's 180,000 members who are now making that choice. It's democracy in action.